Welcome everybody to the live stream. Today we're going to be talking about the best study tips to help you succeed in school. And so if you're just jumping on, we are going to be going over different study tips to be able to help you perform better in school. And then towards the end of the training, I will answer you guys' questions. So go ahead and put that in the chat, and I will answer those questions for you. So first, when it comes to really study tips, best study tips, as you guys might know, I went through college and medical school. Having ADHD and dyslexia was a big challenge, but I definitely learned different types of study tactics and tips to be able to help me gather information that did what worked and what did not work. So I'm going to kind of break this down of what I did that really helped me in college and medical school to be able to understand the best methods to be able to be using. So hey, Musad and the Gusion. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. All the way from the UK. Awesome. So excited for you guys to be here. All right. So the first thing when it comes to really kind of just different study tips and tactics is you got to first really process the information. So whether you're starting a new class and there's going to be tons of material. So when I was in medical school, we had, I think my very first quarter, I can't remember, but it was ridiculous. I had like 8 or 9 different classes. Sometimes we'd have up to 10 different classes that we had to learn information from. It was really daunting and a lot of material and a lot of time spending time in lectures. So it's like, wow, how do you, gather all the information? So you had to really learn these tactics and be really efficient with it. And so the first thing I would do is really reviewing the material. So we would get, big textbooks, sometimes, big textbooks such as like something like big like this, these things that are just very daunting when it comes to studying material. And what the best thing you got to do is, when it comes to chapters, is to learn how to speed read. And why this is important is because it's skimming and looking for, okay, what are things that you already know about the subject? But more importantly is that you're going to want to create and ask questions for yourself as you're going through this. So it's like, what questions you have on this subject? The other thing is you get the material, so the slides, before the lecture. And this is something I would do all the time is I would get the slides beforehand and just kind of preview it and see, okay, what's going to be talked about in lecture, so that way I have particular questions. And this was way more effective versus me just trying to frantically write notes, everything that my teacher would say, versus just trying to look for and ask what questions I had in lecture. This is a process that makes you more of an engaged learner versus just a passive learner, just trying to passively learn the material. It makes your brain to be more active, it keeps it on its toes, and really pushes it by doing things like that. The other thing is when you are going and you're reviewing the material, okay, whether that's if you're reviewing it on yourself or if you're going in lecture, after the lecture or reading the material, then you want to go back and really dive in and kind of slow down. So the first thing is kind of speed read through it, just kind of get the idea of what are the headings, what is the material about, and just briefly skim through it, and then go back to it because you already created those questions and read the material and be like, okay, what questions do I have? And the same concept when you're going over your slides. What questions do you have that you can ask your teacher? Then the next step is really after you have done that, read it once, slowing down, listen to the lecture, is to recite it back. So reciting back those questions that you had, or also new questions you had that you also got answers to, and new information that you did not know about that subject. So reciting that back, whether that's reciting it out verbally to somebody else or writing it down, something like that, that actively is keeping you actively engaged for that. Hey, Anna GI, welcome. So really just you're looking at that material, and the next part of that, when you are trying to use these study tactics, is you have to review the material that you just covered. So how you kind of review the material, and this is what I would do, is when I would review material after a big long day of lectures, is the next day, and I would have to plan this strategically, is how often I would review my material, because you want to have spaced repetition of how often you're reviewing this, so it becomes long-term memory versus just short-term memory. And by doing this, especially when I was in medical school, is, the next quarter, the next year, some of the material, if I really learned the information and put long-term memory, I would have to learn it again, because sometimes that material would carry over to other subjects. So what you want to do on this part when you are reviewing the material. So when you're at home, and this is when the study time. This is really important. This is probably the most important part, is the study process time, is reviewing the material. And one of my favorite things that, and you guys probably have heard me say this, is mind maps. So if you're not familiar with mind maps is basically taking a piece of paper, right? You're taking just basically a piece of paper and you're having a central idea, okay? So whatever that central topic might be, it might be, okay, learning about all the bones in the body. So you draw a skeleton in the middle. And then you're branching out on each subject line. And you're putting keywords and key methods in there of what is in that material. And this is when you're going back and you're reviewing the slides, you're reviewing the textbook, and you're creating those mind maps. This is the review process. The other thing is creating flashcards, because you'll probably have a lot of material that you need to be learning. And this is also part of the review process, is you want to use flashcards because it's the best way to really retain the information. It's an active recall method, is because you're actively trying to recall the information. And by you actively creating the cards yourself, that is also a great learning process to really solidify the information. Another great method that I would use, especially when it came to really long lists of material that we had to learn, especially when we're learning the human body, I would use mnemonics. Now, mnemonics are definitely ways to be more creative in learning long lists, especially things that are more closer together, that are similar, have maybe similar wording, or how to use mnemonics is that the crazier you are, the more funny and weird it is, the easier you're going to remember it, okay? So sometimes basically a mnemonic is really, you can letter out something, you know, and it could be a list of information. So it could be, you know, something such as, I remember there was one, you know, Jessica Alba, and this was learning all the different abdominal muscles in that area. And the reason why it was called Jessica Alba is because usually there was a muscle that was very long and skinny, and it was called Alba. So we would use that kind of mnemonic to be able to really learn that information and learn that material. And it's just things that can just trick and just kind of trigger. And the crazy and the weirder it is, the better. Okay, so that is the review process. Then the next part of it is you want to be able to test yourself. Okay, so testing yourself is really critical, so that make sure you know what you actually know, right? You want to make sure you know this information before actually exam day. So what I do for this is when you're testing yourself, you want to be able to use things such as practice tests. So practice tests, you could find these either, you know, in the library. I would find a different books that had several different practice questions in anatomy, in pathology, and all the different ologies. I would find these practice exam questions, and sometimes the teachers would use those practice questions, or you could also find old exams that your teacher has used, and you can even ask them, especially usually teachers will not reuse the same exam, so you could ask them, hey, do you have older exams that I can look over and test myself? This way you could practice and be able to see, okay, do I know the material or not? So that's another great way. The other thing you could also use is Quizlet. Quizlet is, and there's probably other different websites that have different practice quizzes that you could use, because this is basically a platform where everybody, you could find a subject and a subject that you're studying and see if other people have created practice, questions that you can actually put in that material and practice and test yourself. Another ones that I would say when it comes to really testing yourself is going back to the mind maps and also the flashcards. So the mind maps, what I would say, after you created them, you're going to have several different mind maps that you created, right? And what you want to do is you want to have them all placed out, either on a cork board or on the floor, and have a good world perspective of everything. And what you're doing is you're trying to look for connections. You're looking for similarities in all these different types of chapters or different lectures, that maybe there were like 10 different lectures, and how you see connections and patterns, because I guarantee your teacher is trying to find very difficult questions to ask. So your job is try to also create those questions that he might ask or she might ask, and finding patterns like, well, these are all very similar. What would trick me up of a question because they're all similar, and how do I know they're kind of different from each other? So grouping them together and create maybe another mind map, a master mind map, that connects all of these together. The same goes with flashcards. You know, you might have them all grouped together and you're going through the material, but you want to maybe group them in other different types of groups because these ones also have very similarities and these ones have very similarities. And then you mix it up and then you test it again. And when you're going through the flashcards versus just flipping it over and be like, oh, okay, yeah, I know this information. I would take a separate piece of paper before you flip it over, write it down, write the answer down. That way you really do know the answer. I used to do this where I would actively just kind of go like this. And then I learned this concept and made a huge difference because when it come to exam day, when I would just passively just kind of go through the flashcards, like, oh yeah, I know the material, I wouldn't do it so well on the exam. But then when I would do that process before I'd flip it over and write it down, I'm actively writing it down, then I knew the material. And that's important. You need to know if you know the material or not, so that as you're going into the exam, you feel very comfortable, you're very, very confident, and that is really, really critical. Okay, so that is the process. So you want to do the processing, the review, and testing yourself. Now, some additional stuff that I think is really critical for helping with study tips, but also just retaining the information, is a few basic things that you probably have heard of, but I think is really important for students to hear. Okay, big one is you need to have good quality sleep. If you don't have good quality sleep, you're not going to be able to retain that information. The brain needs good quality of sleep. And so what I would do typically is, instead of pulling out an all-nighter, I would roughly just, before the exam day, I would review the material really quickly before I go to bed, but I wouldn't pull up an all-nighter because that's bad. I knew that sleep was important. Now, I would get a good 7 to 8 hours of sleep, and I would get up early, and then I would review the material one more time before the exam. And this made a huge difference versus trying to pull it all-nighter and expect to have good results. So having good quality sleep is going to be important. Another thing, and this is something I have to do long-term, is getting a good, healthy diet and keeping yourself hydrated. The brain needs water. The body needs water. Our body is made up of 60+% of water, and it's really important to be able to keep yourself hydrated, but also having a good, healthy diet with good quality of proteins, fats, and vegetables are your big ones that most people do not get enough in their diet, and it has the proper nutrients, the amino acids for helping with our brain chemistry, our neurotransmitters, such as things like that help with our memory, that we definitely need on a consistent basis, definitely the healthy fats to help with the brain health. Those are going to be important. Of course, all the different vegetables that have all the different vitamins and minerals that are also important for our brain chemistry and also our body's health. Okay. Other thing is also exercise. Exercise is critical. Now, why this is important? Because what it's doing is keeping things circulating, flowing. And circulating, flowing with the brain helps with antioxidants, especially with the foods that we do eat, but exercise also helps with that. And then on top of that, with exercise, it's going to help with also the hormone regulation. Now, hormones have a lot of impact on our brain, and we need to have that consistency and having a daily. So, I didn't have much time in medical school, but I made it a priority to exercise and eating healthy because I knew that was critical for me retaining the information and doing well in medical school. So I made it a priority. I had to. And I saw a huge difference when I started making it more of a priority. Now, on top of that, I think that's important is taking breaks. Very consistent breaks and grounding yourself and reconnecting. Doing long study sessions every single day, the brain needs breaks so that you could process the information. So one of my favorite types of breaks is I would definitely go out into nature. Where I was going to medical school, it was definitely on like 100 acres of woods up in the mountain, and kind of on a big hill and next to a lake, which was awesome. I loved it. I would go out there, be able to have these study breaks and just process the information, just to relax. And that is really critical. And I try to plan in those study breaks that you're going to have. And the last thing, I've talked about this a lot on my channel, is different types of supplements you can be taking. Okay, different nootropics that can be helpful. And typically, I've talked about this before, is, testing is important before you want to take anything. But at the same time, things that can be really helpful that I've found, of course, fish oil is going to be really important. B vitamins, B complex vitamins, because our neurotransmitters rely on that, and that's going to be helpful for the memory process and retention. Ginkgo biloba is one of my also favorites because it increases the blood flow to the brain and therefore helps with also retaining memory and stuff like that. Rosemary is something that I would study with during Why I would study? Because that also increases blood flow to the brain, and it's been known to help more retain information, whereas lavender is a relaxant type of, and I would use it more of essential oil. I would do this while I was also taking an exam. I would use lavender and rosemary when I would be studying, okay? So I really want to kind of dive in and answer you guys' questions, but really these are things that you need to really understand that is important for when you are using study tips and tactics, is think about this process. Now you might be wondering, okay, what about I have trouble with focusing, okay, and I can't pay attention. I'm not productive. These are great tips, but I can't, use this material because I always have a challenge of focusing and being productive. Well, what I would say is go to my free training that is in the description below, right here. In the description below, I have it for you guys, is my free training of the focus mindset training. And this goes over my proprietary process of helping you be able to be more focused and productive, and so that you can succeed in school or in work, okay? Because this could be applied for both areas. So it's in the description below. Click on that link, and that will give you the information. And at the end of the free training, I do give you an opportunity, if you do qualify, to book a call with me, a free call, where we can dive a little bit more into your situation and see how we can maybe help you.